searching for Richard Nixon, sailing across Lake Ontario to PEC. I imagine the moment Richard Nixon stepped onto the dock in Rochester, New York. A few pictures captured events from that weekend. As I view them now, it looks like the Vice President put a real effort into appearing casual, as he escaped his responsibilities on a secret getaway across the northern border to Canada in 1957. Even for that era, he's dressed oddly. Khaki pants with a striped belt and a plaid shirt buttoned up to his collar. The day following the American independence celebration, summer had arrived. But Nixon's stiff appearance betrayed the challenges of a public figure who, though on holiday, had trouble relaxing. Of course, no one in such a high office is ever really alone. As much as he valued privacy, virtually every little thing in the life of the future President of the United States became part of the narrative he spun about himself. Nixon's low-key 1950s getaway to Prince Edward County, Ontario, is a small part of that story, which he told to a receptive crowd in his Ottawa state visit in 1972. It was hard at first to appreciate that a notorious world leader, an American president no less, had this obscure connection to my quiet rural home. Accounts of his Canadian visit are fragmented, and the gaps in the record of his trip intrigued and puzzled the historian in me. As with so many things about Richard Nixon, the details he later gave about his visit to the Bay of Quinte region were also confused or false. Facing impeachment in 1974 for covering up criminal acts, he's the only president in U.S. history who resigned. It will come as no surprise to anyone familiar with Nixon's rise and fall and his capacity for deception that he didn't always let the facts get in the way of a good story. Many of us are taught early not to judge things by the way they look. Yet it's hard for me, more than half a century later, not to see Nixon through a present lens, filtered with the knowledge of all that went so very wrong in his presidency. My training in psychology tells me this is a cognitive error. Still, I can't help perceiving imperfections in his appearance, as well as oddities in his behaviors, and connecting them to his role in the infamous Watergate scandal. You can see Nixon's closely set features in the photos. It reminds me of all the old film clips where at various points in his life, the Quaker lawyer from California who rose to such prominence struggles to maintain eye contact. Nixon rarely seemed entirely comfortable in public. In 1960, people noted how he visibly sweated under hot television spotlights. It looked to those who watched on television that he'd lost the presidential debates. There are multiple examples throughout his career where he misspeaks, seems flummoxed, or is at a loss for words when not working from a prepared text. Perhaps it's also true that throughout most of his life, Nixon had things he wanted kept hidden. The scrutiny of public life can be a burden on those who serve. Still, in many ways, the images I'm examining reflect a gentler time. In a generation before modern telephone and satellite communications, the second most powerful man in America would make a 60-kilometer Great Lake crossing on a private boat for a weekend in a foreign country with only a few friends and no Secret Service protection. On reflection, had more known of the Vice President's jaunt, it might have been doubly worrying. President Eisenhower suffered from significant health problems. A heavy smoker, Ike was a former World War II general-turned-politician who survived a heart attack in 1955, as well as a stroke in 1956. The commander-in-chief's ill health caused him to step back from official duties, giving Nixon a brief taste of presidential authority. We also know now, based on what was then secret intelligence, that the Russians were on the verge of military breakthroughs that would escalate the Cold War into the space age. Even so, there are seemingly few preparations for a worst-case scenario, like a nuclear attack, if the vice president had been needed. The story of Richard Nixon's 1957 visit to Canada fascinated me when I first heard it. The historical and political drama of Nixon's downfall is a cautionary tale of the unlikely rise of a deeply flawed public figure. I'd heard stories of those events for years from people who witnessed Nixonian history directly. A recent graduate student in law, I also found it intriguing that so many of those involved in Nixon's dirty tricks were lawyers. If it's true that the arc of history is long, it bends towards right than it's often been an independent legal profession on the front lines of the battle for social justice. Yet during Watergate, so many lawyers, including Nixon himself, failed in their obligations to advance and defend the rule of law. On that long ago July weekend back in 1957, I imagine Richard Nixon's legendary shiftiness manifesting in fleeting glances at the water. Being familiar with ocean travel, maybe it surprised the vice president that he couldn't see the far shore of what he might have thought of, by comparison, as a small freshwater lake. Niggling at the back of his thoughts on that summer night might have been concern about a personal weakness. Few remember the irony of this formal naval officer, who became a decorated World War veteran, actually suffered his entire lifetime from seasickness.